that we're presented.
I'll double check on this. That's a good question and really good answer.
All right. Everybody want to get started?
Sure.
Great. Let's see, a couple of things. I don't know, we got a couple new members here. Does everybody know each other? You just go around the room and everybody knows each other. We want to go around.
I'm Al Kimmerly.
There we go.
How are you?
Let's start with that.
Hi, Al. I'm Rick Moores. I'm the liaison to this board for the Board of Selectmen.
I'm Stephanie Reese.
Chuck Buckle.
Katrina Carter.
Joe Renault.
And Keating, code enforcement officer.
I'm Noel Musson, planning consultant.
Gerlin Rudd, town manager.
Jerry Miller.
Dave, you're on mute.
Oh.
Right.
There you go.
Dave Ashmore, I'm also on the planning board.
Great. All right. So this is the current composition of the LUZO group. I don't, think anybody else is not here today. There was
Bill Firm.
Bill Firm, we've continued to invite. He hasn't been coming for a while. And then Bill Hanley is also on the group, but this particular time doesn't work for him. So I think we talked a few times about switching, but that doesn't work for everybody else. So we're keeping it. Unless anybody objects, and then just tell me when I'm supposed to show up. All right. So a couple of things on the agenda today. We have until 6 o'clock because there's a selectmen's meeting right around that time. Today we need to get back to the election of officers, which everybody keeps punting every year, and we need to do that this year. Also, in relation to that, everybody's been reading the recently adopted Code of Ethics and Code of Conduct for committees and boards. So I believe just wanted to make sure everybody had a copy of that. As Gerlin mentioned, if you agree to it, sign it. We can get it back to the town. So this is our operating document.
What if we don't? We get off the board?
No.
Yes, I don't know what I don't know what to do.
I guess.
And if you don't, anything bad happens, you get blamed.
Yeah.
That would be so awesome for me, Rick. Anyway, all right, so I do want to get to the election of officers, so I will preface all this by saying, I don't know if that really changes the amount of work effort that has to happen in the committee. But it really is helpful to have, you know, a chairperson and maybe a secretary, but we are recording the meetings. And you know, the chairperson, in my mind, would be really helpful because that person could start a public meeting, or at least there needs to be, I think, a little more participation by people on this committee, particularly when we're explaining ordinances that this committee adopts. Happy to get up there and talk about the technical elements of it and all that, but it would be helpful to have a little more structure to the group. That way, people aren't saying this is the consultants committee, because it really isn't. Thoughts? Comments?
I'm just thinking, we've been in this group for what, 8 years, and now all of a sudden.
Now we got.
Well, we've talked about it for a few years.
I think to be like a formal board, we have to have this.
We just need some, a little structure.
So who
So
wants
we're
to
gonna
be
vote?
chair?
No,
I think somebody should volunteer and or nominate somebody, and then take a vote on it, and then we'll go from there. I cannot.
Yeah, but any of the things that we've discussed before, you say we never vote on them, we only
I
recommend.
think we
them.
do actually have voted in the past. Yep,
We try to gain consensus
yeah,
so that we
mostly,
can go to the Board of Selectmen with our proposal.
yep,
But in terms of, you know, actually passing any ordinance, we don't do that
Well,
here.
clearly it's advisory.
no. So I think that we operate, the way that we've been operating successfully, I think, is a very consensus-driven process.
Right.
Which is great. And then in the event that we have to make a decision on something, we always could fall back on a more of a vote. So, yeah, we have voted in the past. We don't always vote on things. I think that the structure of officers doesn't necessarily equate to changing that principle. I think it's just making sure there's a chair. And I don't know who else is typically on the committee.
Or we should have a vice chair.
Yeah.
The chair is not. Yeah.
So what do you have, a chair, a vice, and a secretary, right?
Let's do
If the meeting is recorded, do we need a secretary?
Yeah, it'd be a formal board, yeah. Not sure what they'll do.
Well, it's still an advisory board, but. Those are my thoughts.
I'll go vice. Vice president, I'll throw my hat in for that.
So then somebody, let's elect Stephanie and then
There we go.
somebody. who's president.
There we go.
All right,
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
second that, Stephanie. I'll second that nomination.
Let's start in the middle.
Stephanie is vice.
Okay.
That good? We need to vote on that? Probably. Let's just vote on it.
Yes,
Aye.
All in favor?
Do we
Aye.
vote for it?
it. No, we do
we
not.
don't, okay, I didn't think so.
So it's unanimous,
Perfect.
Stephanie.
Yeah.
Vice chair.
And the vice chair could also be
I'm
the
not
secretary,
sure.
right? Because it's just,
Does
I
Rick
do
doesn't
vote.
vote.
That's what I don't
Or
want
does
to be
he?
the secretary.
I vote.
Horrible at it.
Are you the select?
I get too into the meeting, I
Yeah,
forget
that's
to
what I
write
thought.
down what I'm doing. I've tried it.
Okay.
So 1, 2, 3,
Mhm.
4, 5, 6, 7.
Great, we have an odd number even. God, it's not
Yeah.
working out.
Perfect.
All right.
Next up.
Now we need a chair.
Katrina should be chair.
no, absolutely not. I do not have the time at this point in time.
It's not needed. I will not.
Yeah.
Jerry.
What?
No, I could be chair.
How many
Yes,
boards do I have to be chair of?
all of them.
Oh,
7.
yeah. I don't think it's gonna change much for this, is it? This group?
No.
We don't have like,
It's not gonna
Yeah.
change much.
no,
And Joe, you've got Stephanie to lean on.
oh God,
After you.
So that
resign.
if every time I don't show up, she has to show up, right?
probably right.
Well, that's fine then.
No.
All right, was that a nomination?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
Okay. Any, second?
Any other nominations?
Nope,
To avoid the opportunity for you to campaign.
right.
So there was a second.
Second, I'll
Yeah,
second,
okay.
Jerry.
I don't even know who did it first.
Oh, I don't either.
It was
I
probably
did.
me saying that I would do it. Katrina said it first.
I think
Okay,
so.
Katrina and then
Katrina,
Stephanie,
yeah.
and then, all right, any discussion on that? No, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, unanimous. Great. I think Stephanie
Perfect.
also said she would be the
She
secretary.
definitely will not do that job. That's the one that
But
I.
who moved Stephanie?
Yeah.
Oh, I did, let's just say I did.
Yeah, I think it was Katrina.
Okay, who seconded?
Oh,
Chuck did.
Disgusting.
Chuck.
Or we can go back and look at the,
Fine.
Rewind.
And can we just depend on the recording,
I mean,
So who's secretary?
the
Yeah.
recording?
The
You
recording,
gotta
the
have
turtle thing and then the owl.
You gotta have one, Joe.
No.
A secretary only has to write down really that we met
That we met.
and then reference the recording. We don't have to take copious notes or anything.
That's not bad.
When we actually vote, then somebody should vote. Somebody should write down the voting results, but that's about it.
Mhm.
You'd be
Yeah,
great, at it, Stephanie.
No. I threw my hat in for vice.
Joe said he'd do it.
Jeff, I was gonna say, it's not much, is it?
We
No.
have it recorded, those are the responsibilities.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, moved and seconded.
wait, is it? Who by who?
Hopefully
No,
not.
I'm saying, he moved himself.
No.
Oh.
I think,
I seconded it.
I'll
Yeah.
second it.
Third, fourth.
I think it was Chuck and Al.
Because you're jumping in so they don't get nominated.
Right,
Yes,
excellent.
absolutely.
You gotta vote.
Your time will come.
Any
Yeah.
discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Jerry, I've been doing the chair duties, sorry.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
all right. Is this a 1-year term?
Yeah.
No, it's perpetual.
month.
10-year
1
term.
month, 1 day.
All right, I don't think we need to get like overly sophisticated with it,
No,
but
I
I do
don't
think
think
it's
so either.
important to just bring it up.
That's fine.
Unless other people disagree, again, I'm only here to advise, not to tell you how to run the
Mhm.
committee.
You need that on a shirt
Right.
for some meetings,
That's
only
okay.
advising.
Never mind. All right, so moving on in the agenda, I did have a question for Rick. Selectmen protocol, I think we've been doing a pretty good job of trying to keep the board updated. But do we need to do like written reports? Is that what other committees are doing?
Some do and some don't. Purpose of me being here is so that you don't have to do a written report.
Great. that is the
Basically.
best.
And if it's something that's complex or really in-depth, technical wise, we would probably invite you to come to the board meeting and
Just
do a brief presentation on where this committee is at in their
Yep.
discussion.
Okay.
And I would authorize you to do that.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Great. This is gonna be awesome. All right, so the next couple things on the agenda, just wanted a quick update on the warrant articles, or we can discuss it as well. It doesn't need to be quick. For a town meeting, which is coming up. And then the majority of the meeting, just wanted to discuss our 23-24 objectives. So I have a few things on the list, but there may be some others that we have talked about and I've let drop off the list because some other things have kind of popped up in recent times. So that's where we're headed. Anything else we need to add to the agenda? Good. All right. So first off, all of the warrant articles except one that we worked on last year, the past year, are going to be at town meeting. So does anybody have any questions on any of those? Since they're pretty straight, those ones are pretty straightforward. The one that isn't on the agenda was the short-term rental ordinance. And I believe I wasn't at the selectmen's meeting, so anybody else can tell me what we're supposed to do, but I think that's not off the table, just kind of, I want to say remanded back to this group to work on a little bit more. Is that a fair?
Well, then I was at a meeting and a select person said that perhaps LUZO wasn't the right group. And then it sounded like she wanted to form another group to, I don't know.
Well, what I propose is that we don't need to talk about that one right away. There's a lot of lessons learned, I think, from the discussion that we ought to start to think about on the higher level and integrate into some of the land use ordinance thinking that we're doing, particularly as it relates to any objectives the town might have around housing and housing development and some things that we might want to think about. And then Derlin and I think need to get together just to talk about the ordinance itself and then some of the things that were the holdups.
Well, I don't think we did a bad job just because it didn't happen. It was kind of, is a little bit of a feeling I was getting at a economic meeting.
That we did a bad job.
No, I just was getting the feeling that perhaps someone thought maybe we didn't do a good job and that's why it needed to, that maybe the land use wasn't the right place for it to be discussed. And I didn't think just because it didn't happen or delayed or whatever, I don't think it's because we did a bad job. Or,
It's gonna end up in the LUZO anyways.
yeah,
Yeah, you know, when we make revisions to allowed zoning in different places, it's gonna be a LUZO issue.
agreed.
So yeah, I think it's probably is a LUZO issue and not a separate committee to figure it out.
Agreed.
Sorry.
Oh, I agree. I was kind of shocked when it was said,
Maybe they weren't getting the answers that they wanted.
maybe. I think so.
That could have something to do with it.
I think so, yeah.
Is there a protocol for how different issues are brought to this committee for us to deal with? Because it always seems like we've had our own agenda and then something gets thrown in and because it gets thrown in and somebody else's priority, it then has to become our priority. So I feel badly for those people that we said, oh, we're gonna do something about Sonesville, or we're gonna do something about subdivisions or whatever it is, we're gonna do something about that we've been talking about for 3 years. And then all of a sudden someone else's priority has to become our priority. Can we put that on? Is there a way to politely put somebody else's priority on a wait list and say, we've got these things? You know, they're not on fire. Nothing's really on fire, but we've kind of made promises to people that we haven't been able to honor.
I think when we first started, we were willing to take ideas and recommendations from anybody.
Yes,
The meeting's always open to the public,
yes,
and our position was we would address those issues as we get to them. They
yes,
would be in order. And we
Yes.
had a list with we had like 10 or 12 things, and we said the best we can possibly do this year is hit these first 5
Right,
and get back to the people that made the suggestions to the others and say, you know, we're right against it,
Right.
getting this done, but you are on the list, and
Right.
once we have these 5 out of the way,
Cause
You're
last year,
number
Aspen
6 or
two ended
whatever.
up going front and center,
Mhm.
like that got bumped up,
right. And I don't,
kind of out of nowhere.
right, and I don't think if the request comes from somebody that's an elected person in the town, that should carry more weight than, you know, Randy resident.
oh, I wholeheartedly agree. If you have an established protocol of how inquiries get to this board, it should be, you know, fair and reasonable for everybody and should be done in order as they arrive.
Mhm.
So otherwise, people are gonna feel shortchanged and, "Hey, wait a minute, I brought that issue to you 2 years ago and
Right,
someone just walked in the door."
Maybe people that have requests that they want us to deal with should make a presentation to us.
I agree.
Mhm.
Instead of just having letters come in and then stockpiling them, let them come and talk to us.
I'm not sure that we have had a lot of things slide that are easy to address, though.
oh, I'm not saying any of this is
So I
easy to
mean, like the
address.
protocol. I guess just to kind of weigh in on like thinking about the structure of the ordinance and how policy needs to kind of progress through, you
Mhm.
know, this town. There are a lot of things that people bring in are just like, hey, can you just review this and make sure and see if it's okay that we punt the zone change
Mhm.
forward. Those are really easy.
Mhm,
You know, either we agree with it or we don't, but it still needs to go to planning.
mhm.
In fact, technically, those should all probably they could all just go directly to planning board, I think, but that's not the way the process has worked for a long time. But I don't think anybody's come here and said, hey, I really think you should address this. And we haven't actually started to try to deal with it. Subdivision is something that we brought to the table and that just keeps getting like, because it's really,
That's gonna be done this year.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that's like a repeal.
We're
and
so on
replace.
Black with the states.
Mhm.
That's,
So that should be first for,
that is first.
next on our,
Yes. So, you know, things like, can you change the zoning in this community, in this village or something like that? Those are things that really, we're kind of waiting for the comprehensive plan to kind of start to deal with rather than go right to the ordinance change, because it's not a LUZO decision. It's probably more of a high level discussion. So I don't know. I don't think there's been anything that's been brought to the group that hasn't already made it through that I can recall.
And
And usually
we
it's just-
had a list, like way when this
Yeah.
committee became a committee. And I'm sure I've got it somewhere, but it was like the quarry license ordinance, which we did.
Yep.
You know, the village zoning issues, people have come to us, but again, our comp plan is not updated, so we have to do that first, because our LUZO is kind of based on the comp plan. And that takes time, because you got little villages, different villages, and you've already had village meetings. To get a perspective, to help with the comp plan but we gotta get a committee together now to do the comp plan, so. Stuff that's been brought forward is like stuff in the ordinance that I come across. Or zoning changes that people ask because I run into the issue with dealing with their permitting. You know, so, but that's the only reason why they get recommended to the board is to request a zone change is because they have to. But like I said, any land use stuff that's been brought forward is stuff that I'm running up against, and of course, housing is gonna be, it's an issue. You know, that Janet knows. Sign, you know, where she signed that blank, bill to allow. You know, dense development in small areas is really raising a lot of havoc with other towns and. Cities, because it's not conducive to, you know, everybody, we're not a blank, we're not the same. So there was revisions that were sent back but still going forward, that if we have to adopt it, or it has to be adopted into your ordinances by July 1st. But we already have, you know, something to the effect of the accessory residential dwelling unit which allows for, allows more housing, but now it's back to the legislator, and now it's asking to be postponed till October, and then it only applies to towns and cities over 10,000 population, so it's still
Was that-
at the state level.
Was that LD
Yes,
2000
2003.
or three?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, so we looked at LD 2003 last year and then talked to Andy Hamilton, who's the town's attorney. And said, hey, we're getting ready to update our comprehensive plan. We've already got a provision in the ordinance that allows for a lot to have 2 dwelling units on it. What do you think if we just punt it and see what happens with the legislative process? And then, once that gets cleaned up a little bit, we can revisit and see what we really need to do. And he's like, yeah, great idea. So that's what we're doing. That doesn't mean that over the course of this next year, we won't bring some stuff up.
right.
Right.
And honestly, I mean, you guys, we should email everybody again, like there's a summary document, so LD 2003, if you want to look it up online. There's some good provisions in there, particularly given the conversation we just had around housing. Because of the short-term rental ordinance, it's something that, there's things that we should be looking at.
It's coming, I mean, but whether it now applies to us, because we're under 10,000, but.
Right.
But
just
you
'cause
have
I guess
this provision in our ordinance
Yeah.
that helps.
Right.
That's-
What I'm saying is just because it may not apply, doesn't mean there aren't good things in the rule, in the law, that we should try to think about. But, and I'm not putting a lot of things on hold, but I do think, we have to kind of work through the policy making process and the comprehensive plan at the same time. And that might mean that there's certain things that we're thinking about that we want to test the waters, through a comp plan process, because it's.
Is everything in the LUZO part of the comprehensive plan, or does it just reference the LUZO?
So the LUZO it's sort of like a reflection of the comprehensive plan, our
Right.
ordinance is to be more or less consistent with like the future land use plan in the comp plan.
But it's not, but each individual section of the LUZO is not included in the comprehensive plan, so they can be worked on separately.
Absolutely, yes, yep,
Yep.
yeah, policy doesn't stop just because you're working on a comp plan.
No, I know. I just wondered if it was in there word for word, and the comp
No.
plan couldn't happen unless, I haven't seen a comp plan in a couple of years, so.
Yeah. The next version is gonna be less wordy.
The ordinances just have to be consistent with the intent of the comprehensive plan.
Right.
And right?
It's mainly the future land use plan, like you can't, if you have designated an area that's, a rural area, and then all of a sudden your land use ordinance says, hey, we're gonna call this area, a village residential zone, but in the comp plan, it's designated as a rural, cultural area, that's like totally inconsistent, so you really have to think about those things, but I'm not sure how this is all gonna work, but the village of Northeast Harbor is still gonna be the village of Northeast Harbor in.
Yeah.
The next version of the comp plan, like, I don't think your typically your future land use. Plans don't deviate a huge amount from where they are now. What we really need to do is. In the comp plan process is start to focus on the villages, like how is this village unique? So that, one VR district isn't the same as every other VR district. Cause that's what's causes problems sometimes. In my reflection. And having applied it a lot. So. I don't think that really answers your question, Katrina, but
That's good.
yeah. At some point, I would like to just spend, not at this meeting, but maybe the next meeting, let's just reflect back on what we learned from the short-term rental ordinance, not to just nitpick the ordinance itself, but like. Let's think about big picture lessons, here's some of the themes that really came out of that conversation, because I think they're really interesting. Aside from the fact that you're either for it or you're against it. So I would like to do that. I think they're important.
Should we do that sooner than later, though? While it's still fresh?
Yeah,
and
well, if
raw?
you want to talk about it tonight, I'm happy to do it.
Might as
It's up to
well.
you guys, yeah.
I think one of the points of confusion for a lot of people is intermingling of terminology, short-term rental properties and the diminution of housing stock. And that one is a reflection of the other. That we're losing housing stock because we have a short-term rental problem. And there's quite a bit of confusion as to how creating such is going to enhance our housing stock.
Creating what? Creating what, Rick?
Housing stock, improving housing stock.
Yeah.
For people to live and work on this island.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're two separate issues.
So do I. And I
And
think it's kind of caused some confusion amongst, looking at the letters that have come in, that it's almost like, okay, so which are you talking about now? The lack of affordable housing for people that want to work here, or people that are renting their homes and making all kinds of money, or, you know, what's the primary objective here? So,
Well, it was
And I-
supposed to be a data collecting, but then it became an enforcement when you put standards into it.
and that creates its own bailiwick of issues that need to be addressed regarding enforcement. Does that mean hiring another employee? Does that mean all of the money to pay that employee will come from fees that are going to be charged to people who rent properties, and those who don't rent properties don't have to pay anything toward that tax base issue? Those are the kinds of things that are hanging out there that all need to be addressed. Not the least of which is the density issue itself. In terms of, well, let's just take Pretty Marsh, for example, where you need 5 acres to build a home, and you can have what do they call it? Accessory structure. If that were different, say they only needed 2 acres or 1 acre to build a home on, the people that own those lots that built on 5 acres could just keep their 5 acres. If they didn't want to sell acreage to other people to build homes, but that's their choice then. But I think that opens up a lot of people would be interested in selling an acre here, an acre there and all that. And people would begin to build homes on those, and that has a direct impact on the housing stock
So we have too big of lot size requirements.
in different parts of town. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's opportunities throughout the town to revamp how it's zoned in terms of density requirements. That might be worthwhile to look at in terms of going forward on this issue and separating one from the other. And having the licensing issue be its own issue, and the creation of more housing stock, another issue.
What I really liked about the proposal was the fact that it was, and I read it this way, it was a data collection tool, I think. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are they're extreme on either one side or the other. And maybe I am too, I don't know. But without the right data, it's really hard to make these decisions. Like even my wife and I had discussions about it, and we're on opposite sides of things. And I don't know how many Airbnbs there are. I think it'd be really great to be able to find that out.
Yep.
So we really know what the numbers we're talking about are. And maybe at this point, it doesn't need to go as far as being a permitting thing. I don't know. I'm not really against that either, but I think getting that data collection is really important.
One of the things I think you brought up was those people that buy a home as a rental property,
As a business.
as a business. So if I wanted to have a daycare in my home, I'd have to jump through 7 million hoops.
Yes.
But if I wanted to rent my house out to 52 different times, there's nothing. So that you opened my eyes to that piece of this whole thing. What is a business? What is not a business? And that was like, oh, I didn't think of it always as a business. I know it's a business. I do the business, but
I think it can be simple if it's your primary resident and or you have a homestead exemption for your house.
mhm,
And some people actually need the income and they go to a campground
right,
Right.
and they
Right.
rent their house out, and help pay for stuff.
Right.
You know, fortunately, I don't have to do that.
Right,
But, you know, it is, everything has changed in the last 20 years with the internet and everything like that. It used to be, you know, a couple people had a home they would rent. There'd be an ad in the back of a magazine, you know, rent my house in Booth Bay, rent my house,
Yeah.
you know, an MDI. But now with Airbnb and everything, it's, you know, I don't like it, but I don't understand why I don't have a dozen of them. Because I could buy a bigger boat and a fancier car, and I'd be very happy.
yeah, but you might have fewer hair.
Yeah.
And many years ago, I lived in Bar Harbor and I was building a house. And I planned on having it be a weekly rental. And I was on Route 3 and I was zone limited commercial. So I knew I could do that.
Mhm.
And I didn't know about any of the regulations now. I think when it's an LLC that owns it and everything like that, it is a business. And they have to conform to business rules. And I guess it's up to us to make some sort of business rules that people would have to follow. And obviously, since, you know, there would have to be fees and everything associated with it.
See, I
And-
think, I know I've bought property in the name of an LLC and I've been parts of LLCs in the past. And that's not necessarily for a business reason, it's a layer of protection.
Yeah, I have property like that.
Yeah.
It's not for business, it's like just said, it's just for protection.
Yeah, which is.
And there are effective energies.
Yeah.
Well,
But
the
we
other
do-
part,
Mhm.
the other part of it is if we're gonna consider short-term rentals as a business, they're not allowed in a lot of the districts where people are renting their houses on a weekly basis already because they are not permitted uses.
Right.
And I think a lot of the kickback we got was that people don't want to admit they're running a business. Because for starters, if the town really looked into it and went in depth, they're not allowed to do it there. And that's what people were afraid of, is that they would suddenly be told that they were not allowed to do it in the districts.
Actually, I think they are. I think renting your house is actually exempt from, it's like in the ordinance, it says
It's under
something
the
about it in the
I,
ordinance.
I,
It's
I,
under the
I did
definition
read that, yeah.
of a one family.
Is there a time frame on the rentals or? No?
Nope.
Okay.
But to me, it begs the question, Jerry, you know, that's what I pulled out of this whole conversation were two things. One, getting back to Rick's point, is that there's a difference between like a short-term rental and the housing crisis. So let's try to.
Separate those.
They are linked in a lot of ways, but they're also quite separate. So I think I said multiple times, like, we're trying to do, like, we're not dealing with the land use side in this short-term rental or, you know, registration ordinance. We're just trying to find out like how many there are, because that helps you determine, that helps you figure out, like, you know, is there even a problem? Like, that to me would have been really helpful. If I were on the other side of things, I would want to know, like, it's obviously not a problem. We have the data right here to prove it. Or if it is a problem, where in town is it a problem? Because then you can start to also look at your land use ordinance and say, okay, we have a proliferation of these here. How does that affect, you know, your neighborhoods or some of the business implications that come along with that? But that's part of the discussion maybe we should have at some point, is like, okay, let's think about short-term rentals as a business. So what does that actually mean? You know, and what it would do, you know, it's not the same thing necessarily as regulating, you know, the swim to a one-stop, but is it things that you know, is there a section in the ordinance that you have to add that deals with a business? And it doesn't, I don't even know if it needs to be as complicated as getting a conditional use approval for, but mainly, like a set of standards, I think, that help mitigate whatever impact might be caused by that particular preference. I think that's something that you were getting at some of your comments.
I think we could probably find a ballpark number just by doing an internet search.
We've already done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think there's like 300, just that was quick math. But it's not, actually, there was an article in the Maine Townsman, I don't know if you get that, Darrell, There was a really interesting article in the Maine Townsman about this issue, and I can try to make a copy of it and send it to you guys, but it was basically. The state is actually had exactly the same comments that I said, which is. Yep, you could do an internet search on it, but it's really difficult to find out exactly how many there are.
Yeah, they don't give the exact address.
Well, but
Yeah.
the other thing too is if you take the Harborside Inn, which is really a hotel. And the Harborside Inn actually advertises on Airbnb, so it's one structure with umpteen rooms. So it looks like umpteen Airbnbs, when really it's a hotel.
Yeah,
So I think that skews your numbers. And then if I'm offering something for rent and the Knowles company is offering something for rent and the homeowner has it on Airbnb, it's still only one house. But it comes up in 3 different searches as well as RV, all of them. So I think you have to look at your number and then slice it a little as well.
But I think most people don't know that.
Right.
I probably wouldn't have known that. And that's why, again, why I think getting the data, getting the actual a registration in town can't hurt anything. I don't think.
I've rented a house from the owner.
Mhm.
And it was also rented by a realtor or something like that. And they showed up at 11 o'clock at night. Of course, I was already entrenched.
Right.
And the person did a very good job and, they found him another
Right.
accommodation, but, this all happened at 11 o'clock at night. Of course, we were up having a good time down in the Florida Keys.
Right.
So, come on in.
Plenty
of
room.
Hungry,
Yeah.
drink,
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, no, I think that article in the Maine Townsman would be helpful if we can find it again, because they looked at. The state as a whole,
Yeah,
and at what point they had percentages and everything. It was, I think, 12% of your population is the saturation point for
that's what.
short-term rentals.
Yeah.
The problem is when you look at like the island, you're talking 3, 4, 5%. But that doesn't equate to statewide because it's all clustered. And
Right,
it causes the problem being,
Yeah.
it's not dispersed across the state. And
Yeah.
some parts of the state are pretty remote that have rentals.
right. Well,
So-
here's what I got from the article. Number one is the state is struggling with the same issue and they had exactly the same response, which is, well, it's really hard to regulate because we don't really know the extent of the problem statewide. So the state is also working on a registration ordinance. So at one point or another, everybody who has a short-term rental, myself included, are gonna have to register either locally or through the state, and we're all gonna get that data. Number two is the reason why it was important, and they were using Bar Harbor as an example, is because
Right.
Bar Harbor put that into place, and they were saying, well, our goal in Bar Harbor is to really only have, I think it was 9% of our total housing stock in short-term rentals, and when the numbers came back, it was actually like 15%.
I was gonna say.
And so-
It's gotta be.
Yeah, so the data, not to scare everybody, but the data, that's why the data is helpful, because it can either say, wow, our goal that we set up, we're way off our goal, or on the flip side, it could have very well been, hey, we've got like, 6% of our housing stock in short-term rentals, and we just don't know.
And in Bar Harbor, there were a lot of folks that were very concerned that if they passed the short-term licensing ordinance, that would be the cap, that no more would be allowed. So people just started going crazy and
Yep.
short-term renting their places, and when they
Right.
thought they had like, maybe
Yeah.
550 rentals there, they ended up with over 700.
Yeah,
Because they all wanted to be grandfathered.
Right.
Right, they all wanted to be under that cap for when that ordinance went into effect.
yep. I am interested in not that we have, again, we strive hard to not be the same level of complicating as Bar Harbor, but there are lessons to learn from
Yes.
what they're doing, just
Yes.
good and bad.
Mhm.
And what is interesting is to see that over time, what's gonna happen
Mhm.
with their housing stock now that these rules are in place, and it's already happening that there are. Homes that are coming back on the market that
Mhm.
can't be short-term rentals anymore, that now are a little less, a little more affordable
Mm.
than they were before, but still not affordable.
Less outrageous.
Less outrageous, but
Yeah.
Katrina, but I think like the market is so out of whack right now, it's just hard to unwind it, you can't, it's somebody's gonna have to take a loss at some point in order for it to get back to where it goes, and Katrina's been kind enough to send me once a month, like, here's what's available in the town of Mount Desert for houses. So I know like kind of the range of land and housing that's been available, and I also know the median income, and I know that nothing in
Yeah.
almost the past year has been even remotely close to the
Not
median
close.
income. So what I'd like to do, when we start talking about this, like, short-term rentals is one thing. Yep, there's an issue. We need to understand it. We also need to understand what are the land use implications of short-term rentals, and we're gonna start working on that. But then flipping over to housing, if we have a goal of increasing the availability of year-round housing, I'd like to start to put some numbers to that too, instead of saying, you know, a lot of people use median income and all that. Well, what does that really mean? So we should be talking about like, here's the area median income. This is what the average, you know, the median amount of money that you need to be able to afford a house here, or what, and the difference is what people actually make versus what they need to make in order to afford it. So when we start to talk about it, we're gonna start to talk about it in actual numbers, because I think that translates better into like, hey, we can get a bunch of houses that are like 120% of the area median income, or what does that really do to me? And I'm in the business, it still doesn't mean anything. It's like, great, what does that mean?
What's that
But
number?
if you're saying like, you have to have a family making over $120,000 in order to, you know, afford a house here, that means something to people. So we should start talk on it in those terms. And that's maybe a comp plan, you know, as we get into it through the comprehensive plan. I didn't want to cut off conversation on the lessons learned.
But you know, it's hard at a place where property is at a premium, you know, to have affordable housing. All the costs have gone way up.
Yep.
You know, from labor, materials, lumber prices finally gone down. You know, but you know, a couple of years ago, 2x4 was, you know, $8.95.
Yeah.
And you know, that's, you know, so affordable housing is kind of like a dream these days. It's something you can't really attain. One of my neighbors lives in Portsmouth, and they've been addressing that. And I will talk to him again, and I'll write it down and I'll send it to you. What Portsmouth has been doing, and they've been pretty successful with that. And I can't remember the exact parts of, you know, what they were doing, but, you know, it was more, instead of houses, it was more apartments. And they would do something to, you know, help them become from an apartment to a condo or something like that. I can't recall what it is, but I'll ask them and I'll get the particulars.
Great,
And
yeah,
how they have been addressing that.
yeah.
But you know, it's just the bare cost for a house. You know, the bare cost for, if you take a raw piece of land, it's gonna be, you know, even if you get piece of land for almost free, it's gonna be 50, 60, 70, almost $100,000 before you're ready to put a house on it, getting everything. And then the house itself, you know, there is no affordable housing anymore. Affordable house is what, 350, 400,000? And, you know, it's not much difference if you live in Ellsworth. Or, you know,
It's getting worse.
It's getting
Moving,
worse.
It's moving.
Yeah, it is.
it's
Ripples.
it's the property may cost less, but it becomes a smaller percentage. You know, because all the other costs are roughly the same, the groundwork, the house itself, all this.
Yep,
It's just expensive now.
It is.
So I don't know. I know the state of Maine has some programs where I think, you know, they'll give you $10,000 to help you get started, but
yeah, it depends on your income.
yes,
Yeah, so I would say it's like housing that is affordable to who, it depends on where you find it. And my experience is that the state has a bunch of programs that are helpful for people who make below a certain threshold, but not for people who make, you know, between a certain threshold. I call that the missing middle, but I think there's another way you can think about that too. But like there's a gap between where you can get help and where you don't need help. And that's what a lot of work.
Yeah.
But we had a housing conference on NDI, what was it, like 3 weeks ago?
I think so, yeah.
3 weeks ago. And I mean, it was a lot of the same barriers that we're talking about, but I think there's some tools we can put in the tool get, you know, some of which we need to work on through the LUZO. And some of them which the towns, you could start being a little more proactive.
You know,
So yeah, it'd be interesting.
I know places like Island Housing. The area up in Farnham's Way. I think they've only put 50% of the homes they're allowed to up there,
Yeah, they're starting work on phase 2 pretty soon, I think.
up on Farnham's Way.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Yeah, supply, that's a big deal right now.
But
And part of the problem with Barnum's Way is that it's isolated.
Right,
So the people that live there have to have vehicles to get back. There's no town that they walk down to join in the community. They're pretty much in a little island up there and they have to go out to do anything. And then if you keep building everything far outside of town, it solves some of the problems, but it doesn't make them community members necessarily.
You can walk to downtown Soamesville from there.
And you can go shopping.
And go to the theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the one stop.
One side,
That's a little further,
Yeah.
it's getting to be a stretch.
yeah, yeah.
I never even let my kids walk up to the post office because it was so busy. Years ago, when they were building Farnham's Way, somebody that was involved in bidding it said, "Oh yeah, well, everybody will just walk down into town." I said, "Well, you live near there. Do you walk into town very often?" And he had to go, "Well, no."
well, yeah, there's obviously things going on that,
But the other thing I think I've seen lately is with the, sadly, with the resistance of the neighborhood road project. Is education to the community of, and I think it's because we call it workforce housing or affordable housing. And I
Absolutely.
think,
Yeah.
I think part of it is those have gotten bad labels. And so, I mean, it's regular houses for regular people, so it's not a project. I mean, we're not gonna have meth heads and,
Right.
you know, and I remember when I used to work for the Department of Mental Health. And we were trying to put a group home in a neighborhood. You had a choice. You had convicts, pregnant teenagers, the mentally retarded or the mentally ill. And you had to figure out who was the worst neighbor.
Mhm.
And, you know, and it depended on your neighborhood, who you were gonna, which group home could go where. So I just think we need, as a community who is hoping to encourage more people to live here year round, we have to educate those that are not in favor of it necessarily, that it's okay to have a neighbor that works 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, or, you know, 2 AM to 6 PM because they're fishing or whatever they're doing. It's okay to have neighbors and lights on.
Yeah,
And
that
the-
word low income is.
Boy,
oh,
that just makes everyone bristle.
Yeah.
Even
And it's not-
workforce housing is a term that
Workforce
sets
will
them
rub
off.
people the wrong way.
Right.
Yeah,
well,
Stigmatizing.
Yes.
it's awful,
and the-
really.
I
You
would say.
could call them riffraff, like some of this.
Those people.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what Robert Lee called the Yankees.
Yeah,
Those
that
people.
development is taking a beating.
So let's
One of-
keep that
one
in
of
mind
the,
when we're talking about the subdivision ordinance, because that's a term in the subdivision ordinance, and that's the reason why that term keeps getting thrown around in that particular application
Oh,
process.
one needs to
Yeah.
be taken out of something.
So
Which,
before it's a
Yeah.
different term, housing that is affordable, but
yeah,
in the
Something.
subdivision ordinance, the
Opportunity.
provision that
Yeah.
we use,
I mean,
yeah, it's called,
that's
it's
right.
called workforce, it's,
But now it's workforce housing.
but it's,
Right.
it's the workforce housing
Yes.
section of the ordinance.
And it
Mhm.
previously, it wasn't a bad thing to have workforce housing, but now, every time I hear about it, and those people that aren't in favor of it, I mean, they say it with such disdain.
yes,
You can hear it just dripping out of their mouths.
Yeah,
Not in my neighborhood.
There you go.
it's- yeah.
One accused MB 365 of building homes for drug dealers.
Oh,
There you
yeah.
go.
I think everyone's heard it all for.
Drug dealers live in better houses.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, with this
Yeah.
person, I'd rather have the
Yeah.
drug dealer next door than that.
Oh, yeah,
There you go.
yeah, so, I don't know.
But that's neither here nor there.
You know, one of the other hard things is, you know, a contractor can make a house that he's gonna sell for $1 million. And he can make a house that he's gonna try to sell for $300,000 and he makes no profit on that, and he makes lots of profit on that, so why should I make that?
I
And
agree.
that's another one of those, you know,
Mhm.
there's, I just
Well,
don't
how do
see
you
much
tell
hope.
someone how much to sell their house for?
Yeah.
That's another hard, I mean, say you're 85 years old and you want to retire, how do you say, if someone's willing to pay $1 million for a house, how do you say, no, I should lower this so someone else, and that's, I think that's a hard one to swallow.
Yeah, the market is really
It's
weird.
so messed up right
Al will
now.
come in and say, guess what?
Yeah.
So and
Yeah.
so just sold for. I'm
Yeah.
like, he always questions me and I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
I don't, yeah,
And
And
that-
yet,
But
last
it's
year,
incredible.
But
So
what
I'm
do we
like, how do you base your
I know.
assessment on the market value when
Right.
it's so off the wall?
right,
and last year I had a buyer who bought a year-round home in a year-round neighborhood. And the seller left about $50,000 on the table because he sold to this buyer. He had a summer family willing to offer this. He had a year-round family willing to offer this. And luckily he took my year-round offer. And we all knew he was leaving a lot of money on the table, but it was because it was he felt it was the right thing for the neighborhood. Not everyone can afford to leave
Right.
50 grand on the table.
right,
I know.
agree.
Yeah.
That's the other.
I think one of the
problem,
things we talked about at the housing summit was that issue, like, we don't,
Mm-hmm.
you can't begrudge people for
yeah. Right.
doing what's in their own best interest.
Right.
Mhm.
Now we need to accept that,
Yeah.
and we need to work with the private sector and figure out like,
Mhm.
okay, how do we work with that assumption and then
Mhm.
do what's good? So you can, I feel strongly that you can still figure out ways to do good things and make money. That's it.
Yes,
You've got to be able to do
figure
that.
out somehow, yeah.
My better half's, two daughters, both nurses, they just bought houses in southern Maine. And they wrote elaborate letters, you know, please sell to me.
Yeah.
And in each case, they bought a house that was owned by medical professionals. And they chose to sell to them
Yeah.
I don't
eventually.
think you can do that.
No, the real estate commission says you can't do that anymore because it's very prejudiced.
Yeah,
And I've used love letters before until they said no.
Yeah, we've
But
done it before.
your daughters weren't realtors, were they?
No, but if they were represented by realtors, they wouldn't have necessarily been allowed to do that.
Huh.
And I think some of the affordable housing here, don't they have stipulations when they go to sell them?
Yes.
Covenants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they,
Mhm.
one of the great things about owning a home is you buy a home, you struggle, blah, blah, blah. And 30, 40 years later, you sell it and I got this giant pile of money. And, you know, the so-called people that are money challenged, you know, they have to get a house like that and they lose that benefit.
Right,
And
Yeah,
They can get
that's
some of the
unfortunate.
benefit though.
Yes,
Yeah.
but they also don't own the land, correct?
Some.
It's,
sometimes everybody's different.
some cost of living index or something, you know.
Yeah, and what you did, I mean, if I put in granite countertops, I would
Yeah.
get reimbursed better than if I put in formica countertops.
Yes, right.
But I mean, so I thought, what was the Anastasia, what's his name was here?
Steve.
Yeah.
His comment was, because I always think about that too, because that's what we're all trained to think, right?
Yeah.
But I think he
Mhm.
did, his comment about living in front of the way was really, really interesting and very powerful, like,
Mhm.
they invested in there, not just, not thinking that this is
Right.
gonna be our
Yeah.
a retirement account, they have jobs or, you know, some
Mhm.
people will have retirement in other ways, but because they wanted to be in a community or in this
Yes.
community.
Mhm.
And I think, so using the, you know, covenants as a reason not to do something,
Mhm.
because I had the same a lot for a long time, it's similar, like, well, who's even gonna do that? But a lot of people do that, and it's a different, the mindset is shifting for home ownership in that way.
Day Mountain was, Day Mountain was set up
Yes.
that way too.
Same way.
Yep, same
Yeah.
way, yep.
They learned the lesson, like, what was the place over in Bar Harbor?
The little monopoly houses.
Well, they were like, one of the first
Kings
ones. It's like,
Creek, no, not
Yeah,
that.
they were Tabitha's,
Oh,
Jeremy Breyer,
Yeah.
Angie,
Yeah.
yeah, well, those guys,
Or
they
another
were
one.
like, oh yeah, we're
Yeah,
gonna give
they
you
did
the
a
land.
lottery. with them.
Yeah, and they got the land, that was like one of the first
Yes.
Mhm.
workforce housing projects.
Yeah, but they put all their money into that, and they don't get it in
Mhm.
return.
What?
That's what she said, Angie.
Really?
Mhm.
That's not what I heard, but
Mhm.
anyway, I thought,
That's what I heard, but
Mhm.
well, you know better than I do.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Certainly, we think that Rick had a great point early on in the meeting, is looking at lot sizes.
Yeah.
And maybe that needs to change
Mhm.
to create more buildable land.
Little bit, yeah, I mean, is it 5 acres and pretty
Some are
much?
5 and 3.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's
so
a
we
lot
have
of
5
land.
minutes left.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna review my kind of top 2 or 3 things that were on the list. Comprehensive, the subdivision ordinance needs to change. That's gonna be a huge
Mhm.
push.
Yep.
And in doing so, we've already got a draft. Actually, Dave, a year or so ago, actually read it, made some good comments, so I've been working through those. But focusing on some of the things that we need to focus on in the subdivision ordinance are, does the workforce housing provision need to change and how? And let's separate workforce housing from cluster, because they're 2 totally different things.
Mhm. Agreed.
You can have a workforce housing cluster development,
Mhm.
or you can have a cluster development, they have different objectives.
Mhm.
So that's gonna be a big one. I still want to, this year one of the LUZO changes had to do with, we're allowing like, what do you call them? Not barns, but like,
Residential structure.
residential storage.
Oh,
But I think that that's just like kind of touching the surface of that particular issue, which is like if you wanted to have a I don't know, like I call it a camp house. So say again, I bought a lot on Long Pond. And I wanted to build a small little compound where I have. This is the place where my family and I are gonna go and eat and get together, and then we're gonna have a few bunk houses around there. You can't do that. Still couldn't do something like that because of the definitions of accessory structure and primary structure. So that's something that doesn't make any sense to me, and I can't figure out how to change it yet, but I'm working on it. Because we have all the provisions in place to protect like overdevelopment on a lot, so that's, lot coverage and things like that. But it's that use, if the whole lot is used as a residential use, should you be able to have, structures that aren't it doesn't mean it meets the definition of a dwelling unit, but it's
It's a bunkhouse.
like a bunkhouse
yeah.
and a small,
How did the glamp grounds get
they don't get
allowed?
But yeah, those are, some of them are because the units are, because campgrounds are allowed. And campground lots are like 5,000 square feet or something. And some of the units are on wheels. But depends on the town. We would not allow those here.
We don't want campground anywhere.
I guess a lot of the rules are, that to protect, your property and not have somebody move in next to you. That all of a sudden has 15, 20 people living there.
Mm.
And, that's one
Yeah.
reason why you can't have, 15 bunkhouses. And have 20 people show up.
Right. That's what we're doing.
But when we were talking about accessory structures, I remember listening to Meredith saying, I bought my land in a place where I needed to have a lot of acreage. I didn't want to have too many houses around me. So it didn't seem to me like she was in favor of having the accessory structures because she thought it cut down on the amount of land that each home needed. And it increased the density of the structures.
Yeah. She was talking about, the accessory.
Building.
residential.
She came on board when we capped the size.
Right.
Before we weren't gonna cap it.
Right.
Then we decided to.
Yep, yeah, it's good. I mean, to me, I'd legitimately love to have the conversation because I'm trying to figure out why it's not a good idea, and that may be one.
We're supposed to fill these out and hand them in.
Yep.
You can just bring them back or mail them into the town office.
That's
Yeah.
I believe I did. Can I hand it off?
We done? I think I'm
Sure.
good. I think I just got
Almost.
signed my name.
So,
my
a couple other things on the-
activities or-
Couple other things on the agenda, I would say that we have.
One
of the
pages,
We have that.
what
We
board you're
also
on, I think.
have,
I'm a member of the, member of
Whoso
I can't hear Noel at all.
Sorry, Jerry. So I'd
No,
like
it
to
was
look-
Rick.
not a bunkhouse idea, but like like something that, like a dorm, sort of a seasonal worker housing provision.
Yes,
Like the one unit 81 person unit that's being built in the harbor.
Sure.
So dormitory,
Yeah. If I'm thinking of things that are come up that are could help the housing situation.
And I think that's something that the whole island, the dormitory situation is something the whole island as a whole has to look at together.
A hostel.
Yeah, or, you know, a summer,
We'll
Bunk
ship
out.
all the tow workers off into
Town Hill.
somewhere else, curious.
no,
Yeah,
they
no.
could be in anywhere that you could put them, but, you know.
You could
In,
buy a little cruise ship. Keep
that
them
would,
all
would perfect, we can put it on the pier there. Let it
So-
run all summer.
Does anybody else have anything that we need to add to the list? And I know Kim and I will be going down the ordinance and coming up with tweaks, and I don't think there's.
I'm not gonna do, I don't think we're gonna do a whole lot
Yeah.
with LUZO. Next year, I think, because we're gonna focus on subdivision. And then. Short-term rentals, I think is. The
It's
two
tough one,
big ones. I
Yes,
think,
it is.
To work on.
you know, because we do live on MDI with Acadia National Park. And for many years, our license plate said vacation land. So
Yeah.
I know that.
Yep, and my philosophy is we can talk about it and still not forget that. Yeah. What do we do? Who knows? All right,
Who's our president? Are we gonna,
I would
Adjourn.
entertain a move to adjourn.
I second it.
And Jerry, congratulations on your hard fought election.
It was well done. That's why I get to boss everybody around now. So no more chatting during the meetings.
Do I have to sign that?
So I would, yeah, because it is.
Yes. You guys vote for adjournment?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So Whitefield is too.
No, what did he say?
Okay, so I was.
Thank you.
coming in the-
Thank you.
So they-
Oh, I have to come in. Oh, okay.